Now, the Articles of Confederation, there's actually two camps on this. There are those who believe that this was the ultimate, the greatest choice of government that we could have had. Others will argue that they were so bad that on their way to school, little children were being eaten by wolves, is how incompetent the government was. And the truth is, as always, somewhere in between two extremes. In this case, there were some things that the Confederation Congress really screwed up on, and some stuff in which they were very, very smart and had a lot of foresight. Part of that has to do with land. Okay, now you got to remember when the peace treaty finally came with Great Britain, we inherited all the land from the Mississippi River to the East Coast. And as a result, this was a huge issue. Okay, now here you can see this is a chunk of what we had picked up. Okay, this is north of the Ohio River and east of the Mississippi River. Today, you'll see it would be like Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, Michigan, Wisconsin, and a little bit of Minnesota. And the result is, what do we do with this? Okay, how do we divide it up? That question gets answered with the Land Ordinance of 1785. A lot of times also referred to as the Old Northwest Ordinance. It was basically looking at the question, okay, we have all these new lands of the Ohio Valley. How do we divide those up? Okay, and so what it did is it mapped out the territory in a grid pattern, and it provided that all that acreage, all that land would actually be sold off, that the proceeds would be used to pay off the national debt. Remember, this is the land that had been ceded by the states. Okay, we no longer had this idea that their land grant ran all the way from the East Coast to the Mississippi River. So what they're going to do is they're going to divide up the land, they're going to start selling it off, and then that money is going to be used to try and pay off the national debt. Now, the way they do it was actually pretty clever. Okay, they're going to survey before settlement. So you're going to actually have people go out there, survey the land, get an idea for what's there and what have you. And then it's going to divide all of that land into what are called townships. Okay, and a township is going to be 6 miles square, so 36 square miles. Now, we don't have townships in California. We don't use that particular form of government. You can think about it in sort of like a subdivision of a county, is the best way to put it. Generally speaking, if you have townships, it goes from the national government to the state government to the county government to the township to the town itself. California, we skip the township thing. It just goes from the state to the county to the town. So in this case, you're going to divide up the states into townships. Okay, they're 6 square miles, like I said. Each of those squares is then going to be divided into 36 square sections. Okay, so you have a township is 36 square miles. Within that are going to be sections of 1 mile square each. And one of those sections is going to be set aside for public schools. Now, to hear that spoken may not make the world's greatest amount of sense. Okay, so the good news is we do have a visual aid for this one, ladies and gentlemen. Okay, again, it's a map of the Northwest. You can see you got Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, Michigan, Wisconsin, etc., like that. Okay, and again, they're using current modern day dividing lines so you can see where all of this is. So we're going to look at a little corner of Ohio. We're looking at the southeast corner of Ohio, where it borders. Today it would be where it borders with West Virginia. When this was actually done, there was no such thing as West Virginia. It was West Virginia and Virginia were one state. So you can see they're starting in the south, and from the south they're moving north. So you see it sold off 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and things like that. And each one of those little squares is going to be subdivided. Now, we've chosen square 7 up there in that one row. You can see it's yellow in a sea of green, just so you can see what one township looks like. Now, obviously for the others where there are weird shapes because of the river and what have you, those would be set up a little bit different, but the same grid would be laid down for each one. Okay, so you've got this grid here. Okay, that's going to make one township, and you can see that each one of those little squares is going to be 1 mile by 1 mile, 36, square miles right there. Section 16, like we said, that is reserved exclusively for the use of schools. That is not something that's going to be sold off just for the purpose of development or anything like that. That's going to be for the public school system. And then you can see how each one of those individual sections can now, it's 640 acres, it's 1 square mile, that can then be subdivided into a half section, a quarter section, they call it a half quarter section, and then a quarter section. And so you can see how it keeps getting smaller and smaller. You get down to the quarter section, those would be 40 acres. So they went through and they divided up all of this land and they set it up on a grid system. So that way they would be able to sell it, they'd be able to use the money for the national debt, and they would be able to start to expand the United States. All of these would become states. As you can see, Ohio was 1803. And then the latest one of those choices up there was Wisconsin in 1848. So you can see how the plan was already put in place to start to increase the size of the United States in general. And this is how we're going to divide up all that. And so, we got the Northwest Ordinance of 1787 that answered the question, how are we going to do that? It's how are we going to make new states once the people are there? Okay, we've already got how we're going to divide it up. Now, what do we do when we got people there? Okay, that becomes the question. Okay, it's talking about admission to the Union. Now, under the Articles of Confederation, basically there is a line in there. One of the particular articles does talk about the fact that if Canada wants to join the Union, they're free to do so. That's really the only thing they spoke of in regards to that. So now the question is, okay, we got this land, we've got it all divided. What happens when people are there? And it's going to be a two-stage affair, okay? 2 evolutionary territorial stages. Okay, during this time, the area would be subordinate to the federal government. So before it was a state, it was going to be a territory that was the federal government would be in charge. Okay, today we would think of it that like Washington D.C. would be in charge of that particular territory. There would be this time frame where they were trying to organize, get enough people there, and in the meantime, the federal government would be the one in charge. When a territory had 60,000 people, as soon as you hit that magic number of 60,000, you could go through and you could write your own state constitution. Once you had a state constitution written and approved by the people who lived there, it was then sent to Congress. Congress had to approve your state constitution. If Congress approved the state constitution and all the different areas of life, basically, territory, government, etc., voila, you got yourself a brand new state. And you see Ohio, that was 1803. So we're starting to add states to the Union, okay? And this is going to be something that goes on for a considerable amount of time. The last state that we added were actually Alaska and Hawaii in 1959. So, in the relative scale of time, not that long ago. There has been a lot of talk about, will there be a 51st state? My opinion, and that's all it is that if we do get a 51st state, it will probably be Puerto Rico. That's just a gut instinct on my part and may or may not come true. But the system as it was set up, you get 60,000 people, a constitution, Congress approves, voila. And this worked really well to solve a problem that had plagued other nations. There's a lot of history that once a new nation comes into existence, as it goes through and tries to expand, that ends up causing more harm than good, and you end up with civil war and other kind of disruptions further down the line. Going through and using the Northwest Ordinance and dividing up the land the way we did, we were able to avoid that particular issue. Now, granted, we would have our own civil war, but that was a good ways down the line.